Imagine a man who, without hesitation, abandoned everything he knew, his land, his home, and even his safety, to follow an invisible promise from a God that no one could see. Abraham not only became one of the most important characters in history, but also the very symbol of faith. But was his career just one of glories and blessings? Have you heard of your mistakes? Did he pretend to be his sister? Of the son who was thrown into the wilderness? Of the terrible order to sacrifice one's own heir? Abraham's story is not linear. It is full of twists, challenges, and moments of extreme tension that changed the course of humanity. And today you will learn this complete journey, step by step, like never before. If you want to learn more about the Bible in a way that few people know, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. And comment here from which city you are watching this video. Abraham's call and the journey to Canaan. There was a time when all mankind spoke one language and lived distributed throughout the earth without great divisions. It was in this setting that Terah, a descendant of Shem, had 3 Abrams, Nachor and Aaron. Aaron died young, but left a son named Lot, who was left in the care of his family. Abram's wife's name was Sarai, but she could not have children. Life in Ur of the Chaldeans seemed to be setting, but something was about to change drastically. Terah made the decision to leave Ur and go to Canaan with Abram, Sarai, and Lot. However, the family settled in Haran, where Terah lived until the end of her days. It was there that the voice of the Eternal first resounded before Abram, calling him to a mission that no one had ever received before. Leave your land and your kindred, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, I will bless you and make your name great, and in you will all the families of the earth be blessed. Abram, at 75 years old, did not hesitate. He took Sarai, Lot, and all the possessions they had and set off into the unknown, trusting only in God's promise. The arrival in Canaan was remarkable. Abram traveled across the land to Shechem, where the Lord appeared to him again, reassuring him that the land would be his and his descendants. In view of this vision, Abram built an altar to the Eternal, consecrating that land. But he didn't stop there. He continued his journey southward, arriving at Bethel El and Ai, where he built another altar and invoked the name of God. Every step he took was not just a geographical displacement, but an act of deep faith. However, the Promised Land soon revealed its challenges. A great famine struck the region, making it impossible to stay there. Abram was forced to seek refuge in Egypt, a prosperous and fertile place. But he knew that his wife was extremely beautiful and feared for his own life. Fearing that the Egyptians would kill him to take her away, he convinced Sarai to say that she was his sister. This seemingly harmless lie led Sarai to the Pharaoh's palace. As a result, Abram became greatly enriched by gifts and livestock. But the Eternal did not allow this situation to continue. He punished Pharaoh's house with severe plagues, revealing the truth. Furious, the king confronted Abram and expelled him from Egypt, with their accumulated wealth. But with the lesson learned, he returned to Canaan, more specifically the Negev, and then went up to Bethel, where he had built the altar. There he sought the Lord again, reaffirming his covenant and commitment. But the challenges were just beginning. Abram returned from Egypt even richer than before. He owned large flocks, silver, gold, and servants. His nephew Lot, who had accompanied him from the beginning of his journey, also prospered and accumulated many possessions. However, this prosperity brought with it a problem. The land was no longer enough to sustain both herds. Abraham's shepherds and Lot's shepherds began to fight for space and resources. It was an untenable situation, as the Canaanites and the Perizzites also lived there, which made the space even more contested. Faced with this impasse, Abraham took the initiative to avoid a family conflict. He wisely called Lot to a meeting, and there should be no quarrel between you and me, or between our shepherds, because we are related. Look around. The whole earth is before you. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Abram, being older and the leader of the family, could have imposed his will, but he chose to act generously and patiently. Lot looked down at the Jordan Valley and saw that the region was well watered, similar to the garden of the Lord and the fertile lands of Egypt. Without hesitation, he chose that area and set out, settling near Sodom. Abraham, in turn, remained in the land of Canaan. This separation seemed only a practical decision, but it hid a deeper meaning. While Abraham trusted in God's provision, Lot chose with the eyes of the flesh, without considering the character of the inhabitants of that region. After the separation, the Eternal appeared again to Abraham and made a promise to him. All the land you see I will give to you and your descendants forever. I will multiply your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can count the dust of the earth, he will also be able to count his seed. It was a divine guarantee that Lot's separation would in no way diminish what God had prepared for Abraham. With this promise, Abraham went to Hebron, near the oak grove of Mamre. There he built another altar to the Lord. His path was clear. It did not depend on riches or fertile lands, but on God's faithfulness. When Lot approached Sodom and its wickedness, Abram followed his call with confidence. Lot's decision to settle near Sodom soon brought disastrous consequences. At that time, a war broke out between a coalition of 4 powerful kings, 5 minor kings of the region, including the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. The 4 kings were victorious, sacked the defeated cities, and took prisoners and goods. Among the captives was Lot, who was taken away with all that he possessed. When Abraham heard what had happened, he did not hesitate. Although he was a peaceful man, he realized that he needed to act quickly. He gathered 318 of his trained servants, trusted allies, and set off in pursuit of the invaders. With a precise strategy, he divided his group and attacked the enemies during the night. The ambush was a success. Abraham and his men defeated the enemy kings, recovered everything that had been looted, and freed the prisoners, including Lot and his family. Upon returning from battle, Abraham was greeted by the king of Sodom, but also by a personage Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. Melchizedek brought out bread and wine and blessed Abraham. Blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth. Blessed be the Most High God who delivered your enemies into your hands. Recognizing the spiritual authority of this priest, Abraham gave him 1/10 of all that he had acquired. The king of Sodom, for his part, tried to negotiate with Abraham, offering him all the recovered goods on the condition that he return the prisoners. But Abraham refused, declaring that he did not want anyone to say that he had become rich at the expense of Sodom. His trust was in God alone, not in the riches of wicked men. He only accepted what was due to his allies, but took nothing for himself. This episode revealed a lot about Abraham's character. Not only did he demonstrate courage and leadership in rescuing Lot, but he also showed integrity in refusing unfair gains. In addition, the encounter with Melchizedek was a spiritual milestone, since the priest-king represented a direct connection between Abraham and the Most High God. This mysterious figure would later be mentioned in Scripture as a type of Christ's eternal priesthood. After this great victory, God appeared again to Abraham, and "Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield, and your reward will be very great." This divine reminder reinforced that their security and inheritance came directly from the Lord, not from earthly possessions. However, there was something that still troubled the heart: that an heir's promise had not yet been fulfilled. Despite the great promises God had already made, one problem still troubled Abraham: was childless. In a vision, the Eternal "Do not fear him, Abraham. I am your shield, and your reward will be very great." But Abraham was distressed and answered, "Lord, what good is this promise to me if I have no heir yet? My servant Eliezer of Damascus will inherit all that I have." God then reaffirmed his word all the more forcefully: "This man will not be your heir. A son born of you will be your heir." Then he took Abraham out of the tent and told him to look up at the sky, count the stars, if this is what your descendants will be like. Abraham believed this promise, and God considered it justice. It was at this time that Abraham's faith became the foundation of the entire story of redemption. But God wanted to seal this promise with something even more concrete. He asked Abraham to prepare a sacrifice: a bull, a goat, 1 ram, all 3 years old, as well as a turtle dove, 1 chick. Abraham obeyed and divided the animals in half, as was customary in the United States. Pacts of the time. When the sun went down, a great terror fell on him, and God revealed something to him: "Your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs and will be enslaved for 400 years, but I will deliver them with great riches." Then in the darkness, Abraham saw a steaming pot, 1 lit torch passing between the halves of the animals. It was God himself sealing his covenant. He declared that he would give the land from Egypt to the Euphrates to Abraham's descendants. That moment marked an unwavering commitment of the Creator to his servant. However, the promise seemed to persist, and Sarai began to hesitate. Then he made a decision. He offered his Egyptian servant Hagar, so that Abraham could have a son through her. This was a custom of the time, but it was not part of God's original plan. Abraham accepted the suggestion, and Hagar became pregnant, but this choice brought painful consequences. As soon as Hagar realized that she was pregnant, she began to despise Sarai. Feeling humiliated, Sarai confronted Abraham, who allowed her to do what she saw fit. Then Sarai began to mistreat Hagar, who fled into the desert. But there by a fountain, an angel of the Lord appeared to him and returned to his mistress and submitted to her. "Your son will be called Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your suffering." He also revealed that Ishmael would have numerous descendants, but would live in constant conflict. Hagar returned and gave birth to Ishmael when Abraham was 86 years old. It seemed that there would finally be an heir, but God still had other plans. The son of promise had not yet been born. 13 years had passed since Ishmael's birth, and Abraham was already 99 years old. It was then that God appeared to him again, bringing him a revelation that would change. "I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be perfect. I will make a covenant with you and multiply your descendants enormously." It was a call for an even deeper commitment. At this manifestation, Abraham prostrated himself with his face to the ground. In this encounter, God did something without changing the name of his servant. "Your name will no longer be Abram, but Abraham, for I will make you the father of many nations." The meaning of the name now reflected the greatness of the divine promise. But the transformation didn't end there. "As for Sarai your wife, you shall no longer call her Sarai, but Sarah, for she will bear you a son." This seemed impossible, since Sarah was 90 years old and sterile. Did Abraham laugh and think, can a 100-year-old man be the father of a son? And Sarah, who is 90 years old, can give birth? Despite initial unbelief, God reaffirmed that Sarah will bear you a son and you will name him Isaac. "I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." God also confirmed that he would bless Ishmael, making him the father of 12 princes and a great nation. But the main covenant would be with Isaac, the son of promise. As a sign of this eternal covenant, God commanded that Abraham and all the men of his household be circumcised. Every male must be circumcised on the 8th day of his life. "This will be the sign of the covenant between me and your descendants after you." Abraham obeyed without hesitation. On the same day he, Ishmael, and all his servants were circumcised. This rite symbolized a total separation between God's people and the other nations, marking Abraham and his descendants as chosen by the Most High. Short time later, 3 mysterious visitors appeared at the entrance to Abraham's tent in the heat of the day. Realizing they were special, he ran to welcome them, offering them bread, curdled meat, and milk. They accepted their hospitality, and before leaving, one of them made a statement: "Within a year I will return and Sarah will have a child." Sarah, who was listening from inside, laughed at. Silence. How could an old woman give birth to a child? But did God confront her why Sarah laughed? Is there anything too difficult for the Lord? It was a reminder that divine time is different from human time. The promise was about to be fulfilled. A day after the visit of the 3 mysterious men, Abraham walked with them to a high point from where Sodom could be seen. It was then that the Lord revealed something terrible. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was great, and their sin became very serious. God would come down to see if the wickedness of the city was as great as it was heard. Did Abraham, knowing the merciful character of the Lord, dare to destroy the righteous with the wicked? "If there are 50 righteous people, will you spare the city?" Did God answer yes? And Abraham insisted and reduced the number, and whether it's 45 or 40 or 30. God agreed to each new reduction. Did the patriarch, realizing that there could be even fewer, dare to what if it was 20 or 10 or? The Lord answered, "If there are 10 righteous people, I will not destroy the city." But Abraham knew that in Sodom there wasn't even that number. He returned to his tent while the angels descended to Sodom, where Lot lived. When evening came, Lot was sitting at the city gate when he saw the visitors and invited them to spend the night at his house. They refused, but Lot insisted because he knew the danger they were in there. Later, the men of the city surrounded his house and demanded that the visitors be handed over to them for their bad practices. Lot, in desperation, tried to protect them, even offering his daughters to prevent them from touching the foreigners. But the men of Sodom became enraged and tried to break into the house by force. At that moment the angels intervened, brought Lot inside and struck them blindly, preventing them from finding the door. "So, take your family and get out of here. Let us destroy this city, for the cry against it has reached the Lord." But Lot's sons-in-law scoffed at the warning and refused to go. At dawn, the angels took Lot, his wife, and their daughters out of the city because they were taking too long. The order was run. And don't look back. Lot asked permission to take refuge in a smaller city called Zohar. As soon as Lot arrived, fire and brimstone began to fall from heaven, completely consuming Sodom and Gomorrah. But his wife, disobeying the order, looked back and became a pillar of salt. From afar, Abraham saw smoke rising like that of a great furnace. God had fulfilled his sentence in that corrupt land, but he had mercy on Lot through Abraham's intercession. Frightened by the destruction and fearing for the future, Lot left Zohar and took refuge with his daughters in a cave in the mountains. Fear and lack of perspective made his daughters make a terrible decision to get their father drunk and have children with him. The eldest gave birth to Moab, the ancestor of the Moabites, and the Menorah ben-Hami, the father of the Ammonites. This event sealed the fate of two peoples who would later become enemies of Israel. Meanwhile, Abraham remained in Canaan, waiting for the fulfillment of God's greatest promise. Time passed and Sarah, now older, finally saw the promise fulfilled. Just as God had said. At the appointed time, she became pregnant and gave birth to a son for Abraham. The child was named Isaac, which means laughter, because Sarah laughed when she heard that she would have a son in her old age. Abraham, faithful to the covenant, circumcised Isaac on the 8th day, as God had commanded. Now Abraham's house had a rightful heir and joy filled the camp. When Isaac grew up, Hagar's son Ishmael began to mock him. Sarah became aware of this rivalry and was outraged. She demanded that Abraham dismiss Hagar and Ishmael, as she did not want the servant's son to share the inheritance with Isaac. This request deeply saddened Abraham, for despite the circumstances, Ishmael was still his son. But God intervened and listens to Isaac's request that Isaac be your descendants. But don't worry about Ishmael, because I will also make him a great nation because he is your son. The next morning, Abraham prepared bread 1 canteen of water, gave it to Hagar, and sent her away. She and Ishmael wandered in the desert of Beersheba until the waters ran out. Weakly, Hagar placed the child under a bush and walked away, for she could not bear to see him die. In desperation, he began to weep, but God heard the boy's cry and sent an angel to bring him to the altar. God has heard the voice of the arise, and take him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation. Suddenly, God opened Hagar's eyes and she saw a well of water. She ran, filled the canteen, and gave Ishmael a drink. From that moment on, the boy became strong in the desert, becoming a skilled archer. He lived in the region of Paran, and his mother got him an Egyptian wife. Thus the descendants of Ishmael began to be formed, fulfilling God's promise that he would give rise to a great people. Meanwhile, Abraham continued his life in Canaan, strengthening his alliances. King Abimelech, realizing that God was with him, proposed a covenant of peace. Abraham accepted and made a covenant at Beersheba, where he planted a tamarisk tree and called on the name of the Lord, continued to live on earth as a pilgrim, waiting for the next chapter of God's promise to be fulfilled. Isaac's birth marked a crucial shift in human history. He was not just an expected son, but the seed of the eternal covenant between God and Abraham. However, this story was far from over. God still wanted to test the patriarch's faith in a way that would change everything. Time passed, and Isaac grew up under the watchful eye of his parents. He was the son of promise, the heir who would continue Abram's legacy. However, one day, God put Abraham to the test with a request to the Isaac. Now take your son, your only one you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will point out to you. The order was devastating. The son Abraham had been expecting for 25 years was to be sacrificed as an offering to the Lord. Without hesitation, Abraham got up early in the morning, prepared the wood, and set out with Isaac's 2 servants to the place indicated. The trip lasted 3 days. When Abraham saw the mountain in the distance, he said to his friends, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go to worship and return to you." Even when he faced the most difficult test of his life, Abraham believed that God could restore his son. Did Isaac, who was carrying the wood for the sacrifice, notice something strange and asked, "Father, we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" With unshakable faith, Abraham replied, "God will provide the lamb, my son." When they reached the top of the mountain, Abraham built an altar, laid out the firewood, and with suppressed tears, bound Isaac and placed him on the altar. When he reached out to take the knife and slit his son's throat, angel of the Lord cried out from the Abraham, "Abraham, don't reach out to the boy or do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you did not refuse me your son, your only son." Abraham, out of breath and relieved, looked up and saw a ram caught by the horns in a bush, and he took the animal and offered it in Isaac's place. At that time, Abraham called that the Lord will provide, because their God showed his faithfulness. The angel of the Lord spoke again, reaffirming that inasmuch as thou hast done this and hast not withheld thy son unto me, I will bless thee greatly. I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven and like the sand of the seashore, and in them all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Abraham came down the mountain with Isaac and returned to Beersheba, where he stayed. This episode marked the greatest test of faith in biblical history. Abraham showed that he trusted God completely, even in the face of the most painful sacrifice. Moreover, this event foreshadowed something much greater in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the true Lamb of God, offered by the Father on behalf of mankind. After this ordeal, Abraham's life went on, but years passed and Sarah was about to leave. A new phase in the history of promise was approaching. Time passed, and Sarah, Abraham's faithful wife, came to the end of her journey. He died at the age of 127 in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Her death brought great sorrow to Abraham, who wept for her and mourned. But he knew he needed to secure a dignified burial for his wife, so he looked for a permanent place to bury her. As a stranger in that land, Abraham owned no property. So he went to the Hittites and asked them to buy him a piece of land. The Hittites recognized Abram as God's prince and offered him any burial place free of charge. However, Abraham insisted on paying for it to be his legitimate right. He chose the cave of Machpelah, belonging to Ephron's son of Zohar. After some negotiations, Abraham paid for 400 pieces of silver, sealing the purchase in front of witnesses. Thus, Sarah was buried in that place, which would become the tomb of the patriarchal family. This act was not just a burial, but an affirmation that Canaan was indeed the promised land for their descendants. In time, Abraham realized that he needed to ensure the continuity of God's promise. His son Isaac was already of marriageable age, but he could not marry a Canaanite woman. The patriarch called his oldest servant and made him swear, putting his hand under his thigh, that he would seek a wife for Isaac among his relatives in Mesopotamia. The servant set out on a long journey, carrying 10 camels laden with gifts. When he arrived in the city of Nahor, he stopped by a well and prayed, "Lord, God of my master Abram, grant success to my mission. Let the young woman from whom he asks for water to drink, and who also shortens the camels, be the chosen one." Before he finished his prayer, Rebekah, Nahor's granddaughter, appeared with a pitcher. When the servant asked her for water, she replied exactly as she had drunk, "And I will also give it to your camels." The servant was amazed and gave him gifts of gold. Then he asked about her family, and when he learned that she was Abraham's relative, he praised God. Rebekah ran to tell her family, and her brother Laban came out to greet him with hospitality. The servant explained to him the mission Abraham had entrusted to him and how God had guided everything. Laban and Bethuel recognized that this came from the Lord and allowed Rebekah to go with him the next morning. The family wanted Rebekah to stay longer, but the servant insisted that she leave immediately. Then they asked the girl if she wanted to go, and she replied, "Yes, I will." Rebekah set out with her servants and traveled to Canaan. When he arrived, he saw Isaac meditating in the field. When she learned it was him, she got off the camel and covered herself with a veil. Isaac received Rebekah and took her as his wife, being comforted after the death of his mother Sarah. Isaac and Rebekah's marriage was not simply a union, but the fulfillment of a divine promise. Now God's covenant with Abraham would be passed on to the next generation, but first the patriarch's journey still needed to be completed. Continuing with life, Abraham took a new wife named Keturah, with whom he had several Simran, Hoksan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Their descendants gave rise to several peoples, including the Midianites, who would later have a great influence on Israel's history. However, Abraham knew that God's covenant was with Isaac, and to avoid disputes, he distributed gifts among the sons of Keturah and sent them east, away from Isaac. This act ensured that Isaac would be the sole heir of the divine promise. By then, Abraham was already a very old man. He lived 175 years, a long life full of remarkable experiences. He had begun his journey in Ur of the Chaldeans, had gone through countless challenges, had received the divine promise, had experienced God's provision, and had seen the birth of his promised son. His legacy was immense. When the appointed time was fulfilled, Abraham died in good old age, full of days, and was reunited with his parents, his sons Isaac and Ishmael, who were formerly separated, gathered to bury him. He was buried in the cave of Machpelah, next to Sarah. This was the same place Abraham had purchased years earlier to ensure that his family would have a burial place in Canaan. Even in death, he remained in the promised land, reinforcing that his descendants would inherit that region forever. After his death, the blessing of the Lord passed to Isaac, who lived near Beer Lahai Roi. Meanwhile, Ishmael also fulfilled his prophecy, becoming the father of 12 princes, each of whom gave rise to a tribe. He lived 137 years, and his descendants spread across the desert, forming the Ishmaelites, a people who would play an important role in future stories. However, Abraham's name did not disappear with his death. On the contrary, it has become the greatest symbol of faith in history. His life was remembered by prophets, kings, and even Jesus Christ himself. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul affirmed that Abraham is the father of all who believe, because his righteousness came through faith, even before the law of Moses existed. Abraham's journey was not just one man's story, but the beginning of a divine plan that would span generations. God promised that through him, all nations would be blessed. And this blessing was fully fulfilled when, centuries later, Jesus Christ, the promised descendant, came into the world to offer salvation to all mankind. The story of Abraham is not just an ancient tale. It is the foundation of God's faith, obedience, and purpose for mankind. An ordinary man, called to an extraordinary destiny, who trusted in the divine promise even when everything seemed impossible. Is there still anyone left with this faith today? Would we be able to trust God to the point of leaving everything behind and following an unknown path? Perhaps you've faced challenges in your life, times when everything seemed hopeless. Abraham also had doubts. He failed a few times, but he never gave up. He waited 25 years to see the promise fulfilled. How long are we willing to wait for something God has for us? The true test of faith is not in blessings, but in patience, trust, and obedience, even when we don't understand God's plans. And you, where are you in your journey? Are you waiting for a promise to be fulfilled? Are you facing an important trial? Or are you at the beginning of a new calling, not knowing what will happen? Remember, God always delivers what he promises. But the question, are you willing to trust, even without seeing the whole path? If this story told you anything, please leave your comment below. How does Abraham's journey inspire you? Would you have the same faith that he had? Let's talk in the comments, and if you want to keep learning about the great stories of the Bible and what they mean to us today, subscribe to the canal and activate the Tinkerbell because we still have a lot to explore together. Hugs, and may God bless you.